The burden of proof. Burden? That sounds hard. Can I not have that instead and you believe whatever I say? Actually, you know what? That is how it is. I don't have to prove anything to you. Oh, what's my proof that I don't have a burden of proof? How dare you? Prove me wrong, or you have to believe I'm right. That's the rule.
Another claim of atheist is that since you have made a positive claim, therefore you have to provide evidence.
My goodness, how could they be so unreasonable? They're telling you that if you make a claim, you should back it up? That's just cruel to demand something like that.
Although this question has been answered over and over again, yet they are saying the same things. They are like deaf, dumb, and blind. They are not listening to what the theists are saying actually.
Maybe, or, just for your consideration, maybe they are listening to you and then realizing that what you're saying is stupid self-serving nonsense. Maybe that's me jumping the gun a little bit. We haven't really got to your point. I guess I should actually let you do that. Although it's a little bit obvious what it is. The video is called Refuting Atheists on Burden of Proof Argument. It's exactly what you think it is. By the way, I had another video on this guy like 2 years ago, kind of along the same lines. He was upset that atheists ask questions about stuff. If you want to watch that one after this, there should be a link to that in the description. But this seems to be a years-long habit, trying to shut down the other side of the discussion by telling them they're unreasonable to ask any questions in the first place.
Theists have not made a positive claim. Theists have made a claim which is default in nature.
Default. What does that mean? Is it supposed to be an assumption built into humanity and our instincts? Or does it somehow seem obvious on a superficial observation of the world? Or something else? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. We won't. But maybe, I'll pretend that I don't know that that's not going to happen. But you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm not going to argue about it. Let's say that this is the default belief of all humanity. It's as obvious to humans as other people exist. I don't think that's at all the case, but let's just grant it this time. That's how it is. And then you have a group of people who, for whatever reason, don't accept that that's actually the way things are. They don't accept the truth of that default claim. A claim which, in your words, theists are making to them. Your exact words were, theists have made a claim which is default in nature. And you're saying that this default nature makes this claim about the truth of something, in other words, a positive claim, no longer a positive claim. It's simultaneously a claim that something is true and not a claim that something is true. You've already contradicted yourself. You seem to think the defaultiness of a claim has some kind of bearing on its positiveness, but these properties are obviously totally independent of each other. Something being obvious doesn't mean that when you assert that it's true, you're not asserting it. I'm already taking this way too seriously, aren't I? This is ridiculous. The guy's contradicted himself within 25 seconds. What am I even doing? I should just treat this how it deserves, with total contempt and mockery.
Anything which is default in nature does not need to provide evidence in first place. They need to provide evidence against it.
No, if you make a claim that somebody else doesn't believe, and you want them to believe you, then you're going to have to convince them. It doesn't stop being a claim. You don't suddenly have some magic spell to make them instantly believe you just because you said so. I know you'd rather be lazy. I know you don't want to bother. I know it's hard. You guys got nothing. You must encounter an awful lot of rejection of your points, and I'm sure that feels bad. And I'm sure it's a lot easier to sit around coping and moping, saying, I shouldn't have to prove anything to those people. Why are they asking me for any reason to believe me? That's not fair. They should just believe me by default until they prove to my satisfaction that I'm wrong. I tell them this over and over, but somehow they never listen to me. But that doesn't change the fact that it's not on anyone else to put in any kind of work to prove to you that they're correct in not believing you. It's their mind. If people don't believe you, there's no justification needed. Nobody's obligated to believe you just because you think you and what you believe are so fucking special. People are not your mental slaves. If you want to change minds, change them. And if you don't want to, that's on you. Quit complaining. Honestly, whenever the burden of proof comes up in this theism debate context, it's nothing more than complaining. It's just denying responsibility, trying to pass the buck, and treating outsiders to your religion as though they're legally required to see your religion as obvious fact before you've even bothered to open your mouth to justify it. When the frustration over people not being convinced reaches this depth, where you give up even trying and resort to just whimpering about supposed technicalities instead, there's frankly not even any point engaging with you because you're not even putting up a fight anymore. At this point, if I respond to this video, I'm basically kicking you when you're down. But I'm gonna do it anyway because it's funny.
For example, if I say that my parents' name is so-and-so, all I can do is to provide an identity proof for that.
You mean to meet your burden of proof, you could show their ID. Sure, that'd be an argument in favor of them being who you say they are. how is this supposed to demonstrate A, this default claim idea you've come up with, or B, that you should be exempted from convincing people of your position?
I don't have to provide a DNA proof for that. Fine. Unless someone disputes.
There's so much going on here. So let me summarize what just happened. He says, if I say my parents' names are so-and-so, I can provide ID to demonstrate that, implying the validity of asking for some sort of evidence for the names of his parents. But I don't have to provide DNA evidence. Well, sure, if whoever you're talking to already believes you based on the ID card, then no, you don't, because it worked. You show your passport to the border guard, he goes, okay, go on through. Yeah, you don't have to then do a cheek swab and send it to a lab. Why would you? But then for some reason, at the end, you tack on, unless someone disputes it. Yeah, you think? If your parent's identity is for some reason in question enough that an ID card is no longer taken as sufficient evidence, then yeah, you might have to provide some other form of evidence. And if at that point you don't do that, then maybe you won't be believed. And you know what? If they refuse to do it and instead they start babbling on about the burden of proof and how they don't have it because their identity is a default belief, that's rightly going to make people more suspicious that they're not telling the truth. Because people who can back up their claims don't have to talk like that. If they got something, they just show it. And if they really want you to believe them, but they can't or won't produce anything to demonstrate why you should, even when doing that should not be that hard, that's a pretty bad sign. Now, after you slipped and said if there's a dispute, then you might have to provide your parents' DNA, you were immediately interrupted by your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, and then you cut the video. I don't know what she said to you, but hey, maybe she was smart enough to realize that you're saying something insanely stupid that undercuts your entire point and warning you not to do that. Or maybe not, who knows?
So theists have not made any claim. Theists, what they have done, they have believed something which is always been believed.
Oh, theists haven't made a claim, except that you said they made a claim. Let me play it again.
Theists have not made a positive claim. Theists have made a claim which is default in nature.
So you say you're wrong. But yeah, sure, maybe they haven't made a claim to themselves because they already believe the thing and they don't have to claim things to themselves. That's basically what you said. They believe something they always believed. Okay, and what does that have to do with the fact that when you talk to people who don't already believe that thing and you try to convince them that it's true, you make the claim to them? That's still the case, right? Regardless of what you may or may not do internally.
For example, if I say that truth exists, I don't have to provide any evidence for that. If I say that justice exists, I don't have to provide any evidence for that because these are something which are basic concepts.
If you say truth or justice exist, what does it even mean to say those exist? Like as a platonic ideal or what? I would say exist is a really contentious word there that needs to be very carefully defined. But regardless, if you say X exists, X being literally anything, you've made a claim. And if someone doesn't believe what you've claimed about X, then that's the fact. And if you want to change their attitude towards X, then it's on you to find some way to alter their attitude. And I'm not saying this is some legal or moral obligation that you have. It's a purely practical matter. In terms of achieving the result that you're looking for, what alternative is there? Either you're going to bother to try to convince them and possibly be successful, or you're not going to bother, and maybe you'll sit around hoping that something else will succeed where you didn't bother. Those are your options. What else do you want?
And basic concept does not require any proof. If I say, what is the evidence that science exists? I don't have to provide any evidence for that because these are default beliefs.
Again, this word exists. That's, again, really a weird word to use here, but in most cases, with most people that you're likely to meet, you won't have to provide evidence that people do science, because they already believe that. This is not a default belief, okay? Before the scientific method, people didn't just by default believe that people do science. Otherwise, it would have taken a hell of a lot less time to get to the point of actually doing it, wouldn't it? No, it's not a default belief. What it is a common one. Same thing goes, by the way, for truth and justice and God. These are cultural concepts that are very common, yes, but they're cultural memes, just like all other concepts. They're taught and learned. You also say these are basic concepts, and basic concepts require no evidence, but I'm not actually convinced that this term basic concept means anything in this context, because you're applying it to the scientific method, Ordinarily, I would interpret the phrase basic concept to refer to a concept that's necessary to hold just to do basic functions as a human. You could argue that maybe truth could qualify as one of those concepts. I personally wouldn't say so. I don't think an animal operating in the world actually requires any of these abstractions to be consciously held, but truth would be the closest one of all the ones you mentioned to arguably being basic. But justice and science? No. By this meaning of basic, no, absolutely not. So I guess that's not what you mean by basic concept, in which case I don't think you mean anything other than default again. I think you're just trying not to use the same term repeatedly too much, and so you're switching it up inappropriately with a different term just for flavor. Anyway, the argument is, there doesn't need to be any evidence that people do science. It's a default belief. So I have no burden of proof if someone doesn't already believe in science. Okay, fine. If somebody doesn't believe you when you say it, don't provide anything. Let them keep not believing you. If that's the outcome you want, go nuts. If anything, most people are probably going to find you less annoying if you just don't bother. Especially if you don't then go on to do this instead. Arguably, this makes you more annoying than before.
Another example which I will try to give is that of a flat earth. You know what is the basic belief right now? The basic belief is that earth is spherical. But we all know that just like the atheist, flat earthers also exist.
Believing in a spherical Earth is not basic or default in any way, nor is believing in a flat Earth. These positions are taught or developed, and someone who believes in a flat Earth or a globe Earth is going to take convincing. And that would still be the case if, for example, flat Earth were the default and globe Earth not the default. People on either side of that issue are still going to need to be convinced before they'll switch sides. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with needing to be convinced in either direction. Nobody's born believing in a globe Earth from birth. And in fact, it's a very unintuitive idea. It takes a lot of reasoning to reach that position and understand why that's the case, and how it's the case is really quite difficult to understand on the basis of everyday human experience. It makes sense why flat Earth appeals to some people on an intuitive level, but that doesn't make it true any more than the idea that there's an agent behind the universe is true because some people find that intuitive. And it doesn't mean that everyone else is unreasonable for not accepting that position as true, or for asking for evidence that it is. You're not entitled to have the entire world just believe you because you personally find something obvious.
So, just because flat earth exists, and atheists will say, no, we have evidence that earth is spherical. I know, I agree with it. But does flat earthers agree with you that earth is spherical?
No, and you know what? If they sincerely don't believe that, that's not going to change if I natter at them endlessly about actually you have the burden of proof to show that the Earth is flat. The globe Earth is a basic default belief concept. That'll be the opposite of effective. That'd make me sound like a got-nothing jackass. What will work, in some cases with open-minded people, is providing really good evidence. The famous example being Jeranism, who agreed to go on the final experiment expedition to Antarctica to see if there really is a 24-hour sun, and there was. He is now an ex-flat earther, and the other flat earthers hate him. That's a classic example of people accepting the burden of proof and meeting it. That's how it looks when someone really wants to convince someone and has something. They don't just sit around complaining, no you.
Flat earthers does not agree with you that earth is spherical. Similarly, we have evidence that God exists. All you can do, you can just do a Google search. And then you can provide a refuting video that why these things does not make any sense.
That's literally my job. I do that every week, including the Google search, although it's typically Google's product, YouTube, but that's still Google. I also don't do sponsorships. I'm supported by viewers like you. Patreon has the lowest fees. In the last few years, inflation, especially on food, has gone quite a bit up, and in the last couple years, my income in actual numbers has gone quite a bit down, so I really appreciate my supporters. Thank you very much, and if you're considering it, thank you. Let's get back to the point. We theists have tons of evidence, just Google for God arguments. Yeah, I did that. They're awful. Now what? Wait a second though, why are you telling me to do that? That sounds like you're trying to meet the burden of proof in the laziest possible way. Instead of telling me to Google for evidence, shouldn't you be telling me you don't need evidence? Shut up. Wasn't that the plan here? Why are you giving up on that so quick?
But until then, you don't have any right to say that we do not have evidence for God. You should say that we are not convinced of the evidence of God. Fair enough.
Okay, you're quibbling now. But, alright, you have no good evidence. Nothing compelling, nothing interesting, nothing that makes this at all obviously true, or in any way compels me to believe it is. If saying there's no evidence bothers you, I'm happy enough to say it like that instead. If that settles this issue so we don't have to waste time on it anymore. What does this have to do now with the burden of proof stuff? This seems like a completely different topic now, which is the quality of the evidence offered by theists when they attempt to meet their burden of proof.
But saying that there is no evidence for the existence of God is an outright lie.
Again, we're quibbling, but okay, middle ground here. There's evidence which is so poor that it barely budges the needle. You happy now? Why have we switched onto this random tangent? We were talking about why you have no burden of proof and you don't have to provide any evidence, and now we're talking about the evidence. To stay in line with your overall point, you shouldn't be protesting that you have evidence. You should be protesting that your belief is a basic default belief and needs no evidence. It's as if you forgot what you were doing.
It's like saying there is no evidence for the existence of science. This is outright lie.
Evidence for the existence of science. I still don't entirely know what you think you mean by existence, but yes, science is a practice humans engage in, sure. But I don't understand the function of the comparison. These things have no direct relation to each other. If there's evidence for one, that doesn't mean there's evidence for the other. Saying there's evidence for one doesn't illustrate anything about the evidence or lack thereof for the other. What is this statement doing for you?
Fine.
Fine.
People are following science. People are becoming scientists. When science itself is not something which can be absorbed or measured. Science is a subject. It's a concept in itself.
Why are we talking about the nature of science now? What does this have to do with the concept of the burden of proof, or how much of a burden of proof a person claiming the existence of God has? How is this related? Plus, I feel like I'm getting whiplash with you going back and forth between there's no burden of proof, this requires no evidence, also here's the evidence. In that last clip, you started off talking about the fact that people do science as evidence that science is a thing, and then you instantly shifted onto arguing why it doesn't need any evidence because it's a concept. It's almost like you're trying to follow two different approaches to two different conclusions simultaneously. You're trying to argue that science or God exists, and also arguing that you don't need to argue, and it's ludicrous to suggest that you might.
Another example I would like to give is money, currency.
Why would I need more examples? These examples appear to serve no function in the video.
Fine.
Yeah, fine.
We believe that this is the money and this is the currency which is authorized by the government. Otherwise, it's just a paper.
Okay, and so if someone asks for verification that the money that you're handing them actually is verified by the government, or I suppose more likely a bank, your response is going to be, I don't have a burden of proof to prove that to you, and then you'll give a big grin at your cleverness and assume that that's enough to keep you from getting arrested for counterfeiting.
Another example I can give you is marriage. We believe that two people are married to each other. There is no scientific evidence that two people are married to each other.
People lie about being married all the time. If that becomes an issue for some reason, some sort of legal thing, financial thing, tax thing, immigration, some family thing, whatever it is, something should be able to be provided to demonstrate it. Usually some sort of formal document. You say, well, there's no scientific evidence. Yeah, it's marriage. Of course there isn't. Don't be dumb. Nobody expects the scientific method to be invoked to validate a marriage. Regardless, if someone doesn't believe it just because you say it, you can't just utter, I don't have a burden of proof as some sort of magical incantation and expect that to suddenly work. That's not how convincing people works. You're living in fantasy land.
Because you can have children even without marriage. You can have sex even without marriage. How will you prove that two people are married to each other?
In whichever way satisfies the person that you're trying to convince is how. And if you can't, then you won't. You'll either meet the burden of proof by proving it in the eyes of that person, or you'll fail to meet it, or you won't even try, and you'll make a video complaining endlessly that someone expected you to before they believed you, and how unfair that is. Look, your argument now is basically, there's no way to actually prove it, so how am I supposed to convince you if I got nothing? Well, I guess you're not. That's the obvious answer. If you got fuck all, it's probably not going to convince people. And your strategy, instead of just saying, well, I guess this isn't something that I can really demonstrate with evidence, so I understand if you don't believe me, is instead to basically cry that people are being mean to you by not believing you. To say that they should just take your position as a default truth because you want them to. No, put up or shut up.
This is faith. This is belief.
Two completely different words that don't mean the same thing. But yes, if someone's willing to believe a claim on no evidence, on any basis, that they trust you, that they're gullible, that it's just not that important, maybe, whatever it happens to be, then fine, you've succeeded. The person has been convinced, the burden of proof has been met in their eyes, even if meeting it involved doing nothing. But that's not always the case. You were just talking about cases where it's not the case. Does the fact that sometimes it is the case that people will believe you without evidence make it illegitimate and unreasonable when it's not the case? If so, how? How does one affect the other? If someone's willing to give you the benefit of the doubt on one thing, that doesn't mean they must give it to you on everything.
That two people are married to each other. They will show you a document, fine. We will also show you the scriptures.
You believed him about claim X when he showed you that document. Why won't you believe me about claim Y when I show you a different document? Because it's not the same claim. It's not the same kind of claim. It's not the same kind of evidence. The fact that both situations involve a piece of paper doesn't mean they're the same. Oh, you have a receipt saying you bought a chocolate bar in my store? I guess to be consistent, I have to believe this note you scribbled in crayon saying you're the King of England. Welcome, Your Majesty.
Something.
Even you're laughing at your own point there. I'm not surprised. I would be shocked if even you thought that was a good argument.
So, atheists should grow up and be mature enough to understand our argument rather than asking the same question over and over again. The default position does not have any burden of proof.
Guys, grow up, okay? Be mature. Stop telling me to back up my claims at all. Just believe them. That's the mature thing to do. You don't want me to have to tell you to grow up a second time, do you? No. So tell me I'm right now.
Yes, the default position can be wrong.
Then what are you complaining about?
I'm not saying just because something is default in nature, so that can be proved. No, I'm not saying that.
You're not saying that because something is default in nature, it can't be proved? No, I think you're just saying it doesn't need to be, which if you want to be right about stuff is a really terrible approach. That kind of sloppy thinking has led us to believe so much garbage for so many centuries, and somehow you haven't learned the lesson yet.
I'm even not saying that whatever the majority people are believing, since they are majority in numbers, therefore they are right. I'm not saying that. I'm not appealing to the popularity. What I am saying that the burden of proof does not lie upon the person who has a default view.
Right, and the default view is not whatever the majority of people believe, because that also might not be the default view, apparently. No, it's apparently just whatever you decide to call default. You get to slap that label on whatever you want, and then all of a sudden it's against the rules of discussion to ask for evidence about it. And if anyone ever does, they're an immature baby who needs to grow up. Dang, how convenient is that? What a neat trick.
You need to provide evidence which are against those views.
Sure, if I'm trying to convince you of something, in this case that you're wrong, then the burden of proof is on me. See, I'm not going to sit here and go, but you have to believe that it's not true. You're not being mature if you ask me to prove it. No, if I try to prove it, I'll give you something. I'll argue for it. I'm not going to follow your lead and make some insanely infantile video whining and whining and whining about anyone expecting that.
And you can refute this. Is it possible to refute the existence of God? Yes, it is possible.
Oh, it is possible to refute the existence of God? I didn't expect to hear that. Okay, thank you.
But since the atheist has not come up with a good refutation of God, therefore they have an excuse that rather than be providing evidence, you have the burden of proof to prove that God exists.
No. If you want to argue for the thing, argue for the thing, and if somebody wants to argue against it, they'll argue against it. There's a burden of proof both ways, and people try to meet it both ways. Just because someone points out that you're passing the buck and that you don't have some cosmic privilege to be automatically believed does not imply that they don't think they can refute you or that they don't try. I understand you don't think any of the refutations are good, but people make them. I guess telling you to Google it is good enough, right? That's good enough for arguments for God, so it's good enough for arguments against him too. Google for arguments against God and you'll find them. And if you don't instantly accept all of those arguments and turn atheist, you're totally immature and being a big giant baby. Which, come to think of it, I'm not going to say that.
We don't have any burden of proof because we are on the default. This is the basic belief.
You just got done saying that the default view can be wrong. Okay, I don't believe big important claims that can be wrong until there's evidence supporting them. I don't care about these labels, default, basic. Obviously, that's just a pathetic attempt to put your positions above everyone else's and say that people should have a lower expectation of support for your beliefs because your beliefs are special. But I don't care. It doesn't change the situation, even if it's true. Sure, your beliefs get to be the default now. They're the basic now. And I don't believe them because they can be wrong and you haven't supported them. And if you want me to believe them, you're gonna have to do something. You're gonna have to stop shirking your burden of proof, grow the fuck up, and argue for your position. You might have the physiognomy of a giant baby. That doesn't mean you have to have the brain of one. Damn it, I said it. I said I wasn't gonna say that.
Like other beliefs, truth, justice, equality, marriage, and all the other reality of this world, and all the field of knowledge, history, geography, or science.
I'm sorry, all history, geography, science, all the concepts of marriage and equality and truth and justice, how is any of this basic or default? Why do people have to learn about the Roman Empire and plate tectonics in school then, if those are basic default beliefs? Seriously, I'm not kidding. The definition of basic default belief here is just whatever you feel like slapping the label on. You have a pack of labels you can just slap onto whatever you feel like and instantly make them off limits to all questioning. And you seem to think you found a real good way to pull the wool over the atheist's eyes with this, as if this is going to work on anybody.
And atheists usually say, oh, you believe in God because God says so. Of course. Why not?
Unless that atheist is using very poor phrasing, I don't think they're telling you that you believe in God because God told you to, because then that person's not an atheist. More like because the religion says so, the book says so, the people say so, something like that.
You believe in science because science says so. You believe in history because history says so.
So you believe God exists because God says so, and I believe science and history exist because history and science say so. Is the assertion there, I think? Well, no, that's absolutely ridiculous. Of course that's not the case. I believe people do science and study history because I see people doing it, and I see them writing about doing it and talking about doing it and so on. But again, this comparison, you're trying to use science as a comparison to God, as if they're like one-for-one comparable. Like if something is true about science or the approach to science or the way it's done or something, that's equally applicable to everything else, including God. But that's not obviously true as like a universal fact, that everything is similar to science in these ways. If you want to make an analogy to try to show that what goes for one goes for the other, you kind of have to draw out the analogy. You can't just expect me to make it for you inside my own head.
Of course, this is how everything has worked.
No, it isn't. There's not some entity called science who comes along to tell you personally that it exists. Also, to the extent that science and history are even things that exist, it's the method that's a thing. And science and history themselves are not what tell you that scientific and historical methods work. I suppose if you want to talk how you can actually know they work, you could start grinding your way back through philosophy, all the way back to some kind of solipsistic problem of sense experience. But that's not really the point. The point is science tells you science works is not accurate. And regardless, the basis of any given scientific or historical method and how we establish its functionality doesn't automatically legitimize believing in God because, well, not because God said so, but because your culture, your religion, a book, your feelings, or any other thing like that says so. The fact that people think they can establish that science works doesn't mean people have to think you're automatically correct about that, or for those reasons.
You believe the government because government have said so. Of course, why not?
I believe the government what? Exists, has legitimate rule, actually has the power to enforce the law with force? What specifically do I believe about the government because the government says so? I believe there's somebody who writes me a letter every 3 months demanding money. Yeah, when a human claims power, I believe there's a human claiming power. Whether I think it's legitimate or they can back it up is a real different issue, which in a lot of countries becomes pretty relevant sometimes. But anyway, sure, whatever. If you believe in God because God personally told you he exists, go nuts, have fun. If you weren't already inclined to believe it, I'm sure he can make you. He's God. But that doesn't really do much for me, does it? And it also doesn't make it a default belief or default correct. If anything, you're supporting the burden of proof thing by saying that, because God comes along himself and personally says something to you that he knows is going to meet the burden of proof for you. So it wasn't even a default belief you had. God had to come along and put that belief in you.
You believe the law because law have said so. Of course.
Okay, and do you notice how each of these had a because? You believe science because, you believe history because, See, it's not just default. Something needs to happen inside your brain for you to come to believe it. Apparently, science has to say so for you to believe in science. Apparently, history has to say so for you to believe in history. God has to say so for you to believe in God. So if that doesn't happen, or maybe if it does, but you don't believe that the source is what it's claimed to be, for example, you don't believe that the Quran is the word of God, then you never start believing it. And if that's the case, then it's not the default, because more had to happen than just you already believed it.
That is how everything else works.
I really don't think it is, but fine. If that's how everything works, then I'm right and you're wrong. Now grow up and deal with the burden of proof.
That is how. If you do not believe, then why don't you challenge it?
Atheists do that all the time. That's a big thing internet atheists are known for. It's one of the things we do that people most dislike.
Why don't you challenge it with something which is, you don't have anything.
Well, that's fucking rich coming from you, buddy, after this little tantrum.
The problem with the atheists is they do not have anything to offer. So that's the reason they are asking us questions over and over again.
No, see, you guys have a proselytizing religion. Islam, right? You guys really want people in your religion. And to do that, you got to convince people it's true. And that means that a lot of you are going to be really into trying to argue for it. And that's a great opportunity for comedy. All I have to do to watch you do a funny dance, flailing around trying to justify the baseless nonsense you base your life on, is simply ask questions. For such a small investment, I get so much back. I don't give a damn if you become an atheist. I'm not trying to argue for atheism. This isn't a religion. I'm not trying to proselytize to you. I don't get rewarded in heaven if you deconvert. I can argue for atheism directly, but what's the point? That's not my motivation. But making other people believe you is yours. And right now, wow, in this video, you're doing a real funny dance trying to do that. It's even funnier than normal.
First of all, we are not obliged and we don't owe atheists anything. Baba. We don't owe atheists anything.
Of course, you don't have to answer our questions. You don't have to talk to us at all, although it seems you can't help yourself. You don't have to listen to us. You certainly don't have to deconvert. You don't owe us a thing. Judging by this video, though, you seem to think we owe you our unquestioning belief. That's what it means to say that you have no burden of proof for a claim you're making. It means people have to believe you without you doing anything. The hypocrisy in what you just said, complaining about people thinking you're obliged to do something, is really incredible.
Secondly, we don't have the burden of proof because we are like the one who believe that Earth is spherical. You are like the one who believes that Earth is flat.
No, you. Unreal. Accusing other people of being immature while you're talking like that. But both the spherical Earth and the globe Earth people have a burden of proof to each other. That's how you convince people. You argue your case. The sphere Earth people have nothing to prove to anyone. Yes, they do, if they want to be believed. Of course they do. They don't get to just be believed based on nothing because they are the sphere Earth people, because they're somehow intrinsically special.
And it's like a flat earther asking for evidence. What is the evidence that Earth is spherical? Go and Google it. Both. That what is the evidence for the Earth being spherical? And what is the evidence for the existence of what, and you will get all the evidences.
Okay, so that's your argument, your best argument for God's existence? Google has arguments for God's existence, and you're just kind of assuming that that's going to be enough. That's your attempt to meet your burden of proof. Okay, well, I've done that, and everything sucked. Badly. The Google machine did not play out in your favor. So thank you for finally accepting that you have the burden of proof. Thank you for presenting an argument, which is the argument from Google it, bro. You have failed to meet your burden of proof. Your argument is terrible. Therefore, I still don't believe you. Spectacular fail. No wonder you're looking for every excuse to not argue your case.
The fact of the matter is that we don't want to believe it.
Oh, is that it? The arguments are so good. That's the only possible explanation. Look, there's an argument. If P, then Q. Not P, therefore not Q. See, that's an argument. Now you have to believe me, because I said an argument. Otherwise, you're just being stubborn. No, you know what? I don't have to believe you if you don't say an argument, which is your main claim in this video. I don't have to believe you if you say a bad one. Muttering excuses and fallacies at me does not function like a mind control spell. And if I reject what you say on the basis of it being incredibly lame and not justifying your claim, that is not just stubbornness. Grow up, you big baby, and take responsibility.
You don't want to believe it. That's the reason. You are this is making an excuse. Burden of proof is upon the theist.
You've made an entire video of excuses, and now you're accusing me of making excuses. Great.
And even after that, now I'll find many atheists saying the same things over and over again in my comment section. Since you have made the claim, I have already answered this 100 times.
Okay. Yes, if there are different people commenting on your extremely flawed video, some of them might point out the same flaw. You might have answered this 100 times to 100 different people, but those 100 people are not the same people as the 101st person. This is the internet, there's lots of people here. Also, just because you answered it doesn't mean your answer was any good. Once again, you seem to be expecting that just because there's some sort of a response, that should be taken as enough. But if the response doesn't adequately address the point, then it's not going to be.
And the more you make this kind of stupid plays, the more opportunity I get to make videos on this topic.
Oh, please feel free. In fact, please take my video as an invitation for you to make 100 more. Let's get into a video war for a while. I would love more of this. This is fun stuff. But for the moment, there is none. That's the end of the video. Before you go, subscribe and like. It really helps. Thank you. Enormous thanks again to my supporters. Sign up to the email list for early access, list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.